Okay. How you doing, man?
Good, how are you?
Congratulations to you for being one of our finalists.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, no, it's been good so far. It's a lot of work, but no, definitely I've been enjoying it, and I'm happy with the submissions I've put in so far, and I appreciate the judges' feedback. So yeah, it's been a positive experience.
Why don't you tell everybody at home, because this is the first time, they may be familiar with your work, but they certainly are familiar with your face at this point. Why don't you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Okay, so I'm Ryan MacNeil. I'm an animation supervisor right now at Titmouse in Vancouver. I'm working on Home for DreamWorks and Netflix. Before that, I was at Mercury Filmworks for about 4.5 years. Did stuff like Mickey Mouse, Wander Over Yonder, Fish Hooks. Before that, I was out east. I worked in Halifax for a while, about another 4.5 years. I was at Copernicus, Kaleidoscope, Wet Sands, places like that. Helix Digital in Sydney. So yeah, I've been doing this for a while, mostly Flash and Toon Boom animation from one end of the country all to the other.
Nice. And in relevant here, you are the creator of Pepper in Monterey.
Pepper in Monterey, yes.
So how are you feeling right now?
I'm feeling good, yeah. I'm trying to focus on all the judges' notes, and definitely we're in a bit of a crunch at work, so it's like time management has been a big thing, but got a long weekend coming up, and I think I have the story. The story is where I want it to be, so now it's time to sort of just launch into production and get into that kind of stuff.
I mean, one of the defining things about this that keeps coming up is, I mean, it looks great. You know, animation doesn't seem to be the struggle for you. It's slick. It's all. What has been the really challenging thing?
I think sort of getting what the show is across has not gone as smoothly as I hoped it would. I have an idea what it is in my head, and I don't. It seems like it wasn't communicating, or I was more focused on hitting the exact challenge requirements that I wasn't working that in. So the first one, it's like it's an interview, put it behind a blank background. So we didn't see really any world or how the characters fit into it.
Yeah.
And then the next one, it's like they're in a room with their greatest fear. And I really tried to focus on the character relationships in that one. So their fears relate to each other and how they feel about each other. But again, that doesn't show the larger world. It just sort of focuses on the dynamic between Pepper and Monterey. The last one I did a little bit more, but again, the last one, the focus was to keep it short. I definitely went overtime. I'm not sure. It's trying to keep them short. I remember that was a note you had after watching something that Matt Haynes had done, and I try to keep that in mind because it's like it does allow me to do a more polished finished product, which I think works in my favor. But at the same time, something like Harry and Shelley, where Charlie has expanded more on the writing. He's done really long things. Like, I feel like we get a better sense of the world that those characters live in and their place in it. Whereas I tried to make them all little short, contained things.
And it's interesting because that's sort of it's where you get that judge's feedback where they're saying like yours. One of the bits was yours feels like shorts. Yours feels like it could be that, and it's tough as a creator in this to know like where do I take that chance? Where do I go? Where do I veer away from the requirements? Where do I? And every creator has to make those decisions for themselves, and it's a tough one. It really is.
Mm-hmm. No, it's as time went on, and I get a better sense of what they look for. I would say I'm trying to give them more what they want and less what they ask for, or maybe less what you ask for. So, trying to do what they're interested in and what appeals to them, because they definitely seem to have. I was surprised by some of the feedback in maybe for other shorts, like they would key on like, oh, it's just an animatic, or it's just lip sync, or it's missing lip sync or something like that. And I would have thought that the focus really would have been on coming at it with characters and writing. And you would just think like, oh, if this is great, then we can hire someone to do that later. Yeah. But I think showing them a finished product kind of helps with them able to see in their mind's eye what the final show would be.
It clearly is proving to be helpful. You never know. I mean, I think it's more a matter. It gives you guys an interesting window into what this process is like when you're dealing with the broadcasters, and that they're each individuals, and each of them like certain things, and some of them do. They like it's, part of what the whole point of doing this thing with Startoon is to show rather than tell, and you can see how some people prefer to be shown even more than others. Because yes, it would be. I think you're right. Like it shows that. I mean, focusing on the character relationships and the writing and those things, should be what all that is. But you've proven that having a slick finished product that looks great clearly carries a lot of weight.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm glad it worked out for me. That's definitely where I've been working the last couple of years. Like I don't have a ton of boarding experience, but a lot of execution, a lot of finished product stuff, a lot of going over the final animation, getting that as good as it can be.
Yeah.
So. And it's funny because the animation is still pretty limited, but just trying to get those funny poses and those custom mouth lip syncs and stuff like that, and just everything in the right place.
Yeah,
I think that sort of helps sell it.
Well, I mean, it seems to be working. It's you're here, right? We're down to the final four. What do you think of your competition?
Yeah, it's going to be tough. I don't know what's going to happen. Like, I'll just do my best. I'll tuck in, see what I can do with the time I have. I have a few people who I think can help me out. I don't think I can get any time off work just because of where the schedule is on the project I'm on.
Yeah.
But I'm optimistic. I think I can make a submission I'm happy with and I'm proud of and has a shot. Again, I can't control what the judges think.
That's it.
Totally, like you can only do so much. And I'm just gonna sort of put the blinders on to go at it and come up with the best I can do with the time I have.
Yeah.
Try to make it funny, try to get their personalities across the hook of the show.
I think that comes back to kind of the advice that Andy Greeling was offering to people, sort of coming up on this next round and coming up on all this. Is at some point you've just got to just embrace what it is that your show is and just go for it. And you had all this feedback, because we try to provide as much as possible, but it still comes down to this show better than anybody, and you've got to feel good and feel confident what you're putting out there, because it's like the worst thing that can, not the worst thing that can happen. You don't want to be in a situation where you had a chance to pitch it exactly the way you wanted to, and you ended up making those changes ahead of time, and now you're stuck doing that forever, and maybe you could have been doing this forever.
Yeah.
And that's we try to keep it like it's the whole approach that even what we're doing right now with Andy in developing Sunny and Bentley, it's that no mandatory notes. You're still the middle. You're still the person in control of this thing, and we're going to throw all these things at you. But really, they're about identifying what's not being communicated. Like whenever someone has a problem with something, whenever someone points out something or gives you a note, what I always think what they're really doing is they're identifying there's clearly an issue here. And maybe I've already solved it in my head, but I haven't communicated that properly. So,
yeah, exactly.
So it may not be about giving them what they're like, just they give me a note and I have to reproduce that. It's more about, okay, how do I solve this?
Yeah, no, for sure. Moving forward, I think the judges' feedback, there was a lot of good stuff in there. There was a lot of stuff to take away, like especially because we had all the videos for everybody. You could sort of get a sense of what they liked and what they didn't, or if we just had 2 minutes, it's a little harder to get to know their tastes. So I thought that was really valuable to have everything all together, and you could sort of sit down at one end and just watch the whole thing through and extrapolate. Like you'd have a little bit more context for what they've said about yours based on that.
Yeah, and that's very deliberate on our part, is it? Because we want you to get to know who these people are. The same way myself as a producer or as a development exec, I get to know who these people are at these broadcasts, but you want to know what their tastes are. So getting the feedback on everybody else's, if you take the time to watch the entire thing, you're actually getting a lot more information. So you, like you said, you can contextualize the comments they're making about yours all that much more better. All that, I can't even speak right now, sorry. That's the lingering effects of the weekend. But yeah, you can contextualize it better. So I hope that's been helpful. But at the end of the day, it still is about your show and what you want to do with it. Coming up on this challenge, how do you feel about the challenge itself? How do you feel about what you're doing with it?
I thought it was an interesting challenge. It just, there's so many different character stories done with that similar theme. Like even Home Alone is basically that. It's Kevin is frustrated with his family in the first act, and then he's like, oh, I wish I didn't have a family, and then he doesn't, and then he learns the valuable lesson of like, oh, I really do love my family and I miss them, and this is kind of terrible, and it's that theme, it's that plot, but it shows, it's a good way you can show character thought and development. You know, it's like, well, what do they want most, and then what do they actually need? There was a podcast you had, I believe the woman's name was Stephanie. She was a writer. She talked about like the character rubric she had from Ryerson, and yeah, it was about, I remember, wants and needs, and I think there might have been behavior on there too. But I thought that was really interesting because that's part of the process that I'm not as into. Like, I've been trying to read a little bit more as I've been doing this. Like, I've been buying some screenwriting books and going over stuff like that.
Cool.
Just to sort of get myself into that headspace and sort of flesh these characters out a little bit more.
Yeah.
So hopefully that comes across. Hopefully there's places to work that in between pinata barf gags and stuff.
That feedback has been there. That, you know, they're seeing more clearly what the relationships are between those characters, and that seems to be working for you.
I think the thing for this next one is, like, I will have to push the length a little bit in order to get a little bit more writing stuff out of it.
Yeah.
I could, you know, it's like you could make sort of a quick fire gag thing from it, but it needs to have that personality stuff. I always think about The Simpsons. It's like, it's got those great jokes, but then there's always those character moments where it's like Bart and Lisa are fighting, you know, like the hockey episode, but then they realize that they do love each other and they have that tender moment at the end. It's kind of the opposite of Seinfeld, that no hugging, no learning rule.
Right. Right.
But I don't know. I always, even Ren and Stimpy, like the pilot episode of that, they go to the dog pound and they're going to put Stimpy to sleep, and Ren's out because they think he's a poodle, and this little girl has adopted him. And then he just sort of puts his life on the line. He's like, no, you can't take me unless you take Stimpy too. And he's like, please, God. And it's just like, even though Ren is really mean to Stimpy a lot of the time, in those first couple episodes, you do get the impression that he actually loves his friend. And I think that's really, really essential to that relationship working. Like, later on, I think they got even meaner as the seasons went on. But in those first couple, it's like, even though he gets angry, he still loves Stimpy, and I think that sort of provides an emotional grounding, and that's really important for the audience liking the characters.
Yeah, because when you have an unlikable character like Ren, you have to show that there's heart there. You have to want to spend time with him, and that's exactly what we were trying to get across with our early character development tutorials that we got from Jesse Cleverly. That's that whole thing of putting pressure on your character to reveal true self. That's what that lesson is right there. That's a perfect example of it.
Mm-hmm. It was the sympathy versus empathy, or sympathetic characters versus empathetic characters video. Yeah, it was really interesting. It made a lot of good points, and yeah, it's that exactly. It's Pepper is kind of a jerk, and then I've got to figure out the way. And Homer Simpson's kind of a jerk, and there's lots of characters like that where it's tough to figure out how to make the audience like them because they motivate so much of the humor. Yeah. And you want to make a funny show, but you still want people to like those characters. Yeah. The whole, like, the comedy duo of the idiot and the asshole goes back for forever. Yeah. Yeah. And it's just like finding your flavor of that and making sure that it works for people.
Well, that's what I like about what you're doing, is it is very much. I mean, okay, so we've had the John Kay comparisons in your work, and I talked about it the other day with somebody about how, for me, it's that you're clearly part of that sort of just whether. I think on the surface it's a John Kay thing to most people watching, but to me you're part of what you're doing is very much part of a tradition of really kind of classical cartoon. And it's not that, and John's just part of that tradition, and his work is part of that tradition. And that what you've got is, there were plenty of times when Sylvester and his son were looking for their next meal. There was always those things would come into play, like in every incarnation along the way of what this whole cartoon thing is, and that's where you're living very comfortably. You've got that tradition of cartoon. You've got the idiot and the asshole. It just lives really well in that sense of just like it's old school cartoon, but it also feels contemporary. It feels like you're landing in a really comfy place, and people are responding to it. Those things work for a reason. We like those things over the years, and if this is the next generation of it, that would be fantastic. So this is an area for you. You said like you're an animation supervisor. But getting into pitching, developing this kind of stuff. This is something you've been looking forward to for a while, or have you done any of it before?
Absolutely, I'm interested in it for sure. That would be sort of long-term goal stuff that I've always had in the back of my head, and always wanted to move toward. Anytime I've been doing animation, it's always sort of been in my head that like, okay, I'm going to use this to do my own shorts, or I'm going to use this at some point for something else. Like educating yourself, but it's almost like you're a corporate spy, and the company you're going to work for just doesn't exist yet. It's definitely something I want to do. It's like back to Ren and Stimpy. It's like, yeah, I watched that show, and it's like it made a huge connection with me because I was like at that perfect age. 1990, I was like 6 years old. So it's like, okay, that's imprinted on my brain, and I'll probably wear that on my sleeve. I wouldn't say it's my only influence, and he can be a divisive figure, and I realize that, and certainly some people are turned off by that, but like I love those shows, and I love SpongeBob, and I love The Simpsons, and it's just there's a lot of value to those shows. And I don't know. Those are the ones I like the most. And yeah, it's Looney Tunes too. Yeah. I wonder if a little bit that's why I didn't focus as much on the hook of the show, because in Warner Brothers, it's like Bugs Bunny can be in a rabbit hole in one episode, and then in space, and then he's a cowboy, and it's really, really character driven. Yeah. And hopefully he's strong enough that you can put him into any situation.
But it is like those were theatrical shorts originally, and so it was always about recontextualizing the characters. And they would and some of them were spoofs, some of them were like all of a sudden they're Robin Hood, all of a sudden they're this, they're that, and that's the beauty of those characters were indestructible. Like it was like that's what was, and that we always keep going back to that. And I find it's part of the challenge today is you have to sell on a premise, but you want to be able to move beyond it so quickly. In terms of what the characters are. Like again, we look at Sonny and Bentley, and we strip that premise down with what they're doing now. Is it's become less even like, because you don't want the show to be about the character's job. You want it to be about the character. And I think that's what's pure about what you've got. But all of a sudden, here we are having to try to communicate that, and that is the challenge in today's world in terms of animation, is finding a way to do that and still have the freedom to put them in any context. It's tough.
I think the closest thing is SpongeBob, and I mean, I guess I keep coming back to that too, because that is like the 6 to 11. Like that thing is left a humongous crater on the landscape. Yeah. But he exists in one world. Like he is at Bikini Bottom. He has his pineapple house. He has his job at the Krusty Krab. Yeah. And it's all within that arena. And they're still super funny, super goofy shorts. Like it all works. So.
And at any given moment, they can spin it on a dime, though, and they require so little explanation. Like you can get the setup for the episode in the first 30 seconds and move on to something completely ludicrous that has nothing to do with the Krusty Krab.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I think you definitely. It seems like you need that to sell the show. Yeah. You need, but I don't know. I guess I think it. Maybe later, if you had a crazy idea and you could do it within that sort of context where you set it up in the first 30 seconds and you're like, okay, well, I have a reason why they go into space or a video game or something.
Just give me an excuse and we'll go and do this. It's just that. So you're feeling pretty good. I know it's a lot of work. We do have that wild card vote that will still be carrying through into the finals as one of the judges' votes. So that's going to still be there, but we've got our 4 judges coming in. We'll be going live, and 2 weeks of voting coming up in this round to see if we can pile that up. But you seem fairly confident. That's a good thing to be feeling right now.
I feel like I have a shot. Like the other shorts are quite good. Don't get me wrong, and it's anyone's game really. But
Hazan came out of nowhere. Like just it's that weird funny thing.
Yeah, no, Hazan has done really well. It's like I know several of the people who are in the contests. Like I know Charlie Richards. He works at Tim House.
Yeah.
Like I see him almost on a daily basis. But Hazan it's a studio that does it, right? Thought Cafe.
So they kind of came from out of nowhere to me as far as they weren't on my radar. And I know Charlie a little bit from last year and from when he graduated from Sheridan a couple of years ago. Certainly Frico coming back for a second year was a lot of fun for me because I've gotten to know him a little bit. But yeah, really, Hazan was nothing that I expected. And to see it resonate, because it's just funny. It's just, like that's wonderful. So people keep asking me what I think is going to happen, and I really don't know. Like everybody's got these strengths in terms of what each one does. Certainly, you and Charlie feel more like cartoons in terms of the way we know them and look at them and understand them. Hazan still has a lot to clarify I think, for the judges, but it makes them laugh. So who knows? Like in this one, when you've got a minute to 3 minutes to do something with it, all of a sudden that could land as an episode, and we could really have to think hard about what's happening.
I think I have a funny premise. If it all comes together the way I hope, it should be good. I hope so anyway. I have some people I trust helping me out.
Nice.
I will not be able to take any time off work, sadly. We're just in the middle. Like I know that I would love to put the spit shine on one of these, like just fill it all out, animate the whole thing.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I can't do it, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know how much, like, it seems like it's communicating well enough, and just little, like, in-betweens for post shifts, it's like, that's not the meat of a cartoon.
No,
that's
and
not
dude,
the
like,
entertainment.
clearly, like, everyone, like, where everyone's saying that yours looks slick, so don't worry about adding additional production value. Right now, you've established that you are kind of the front runner as far as production value goes. So that's not, I think, your area where you have to worry about improving it.
No, I've definitely got to focus on, like, showing a little bit of more of the world and more of what the show is about, and the characters' places in that world, and just how that will motivate stories for episodes. At least sort of plant that seed in their head of, like, I think a lot of it, like, thinking about SpongeBob, it seems kind of broad, like episodes could almost come from anywhere.
Yep.
But a lot of it is really how SpongeBob's point of view and personality is out of sync with the rest of the world. King of the Hill is a little bit like that. I've heard that example used where all the characters think they're one way. Like Piggy thinks she's an intellectual, but she can't speak Spanish and she's a substitute teacher.
Right.
Hank is super into the American values, but it sort of doesn't quite, it's like a system that's out of date or it's not quite lined up.
He's actually more evolved than the system.
Yeah. And like the cons next door, they think they're higher class than everybody else in the neighborhood, but they live in exactly the same house as everybody else. Dale thinks there's conspiracies going on in the government, but his wife is conspiring right under his nose. And it's sort of, there's all these things going on where where all these characters are sort of out of step with the reality of the world. And I think that's what's going on in my cartoon, and I absolutely have not shown that at all. Like,
but I think I will say that, I mean, I've heard this from a lot from the creators, that this is where, like, but this actually is all kind of, it does sort of follow the intent of the steps. That's why we have this one set up, that when we're down to our final four and we've got ones that we feel really strong, we've gotten to this point because we feel strongly about the characters, we feel strongly about the things that you've shown us so far, and in this one you've got that 1 to 3 minutes to show the whole thing. And we wanted to, and I think there's been a little bit of people wrestling with that because it sounds as though they haven't had a chance to show their thing yet. But that's part of that competitive process. Anywhere, like if you've done those other steps right, it brought you here. and now here you are, and now you have that slightly bigger play room, a little more room to play in, and you can show us all the rest of that, and that's what's going to get them to say yes or no. And you'll end up with a 1 to 3 minute little piece that whether even if it's a no here, you've now got something that you've shaped this way, and really shows in a more developed way than when you came into it. If you came into it and did this first, you wouldn't be doing the same thing you're doing right now.
Absolutely.
So and to hear the feedback that you've watched all the videos, you watched the podcast, that kind of stuff. That's amazing for me that people are actually paying attention, and that what we're trying to put out there is of some use, because those podcasts are kind of wildly different, and there are all these things. But I really think there's a lot in them that are. It's all the stuff that I wish I had starting out as well. So that your comment about the company that doesn't exist yet, that you're. I always say I always try to get a desk next to the boss's office, because I want to learn everything there is to learn about how this thing got to that place. So we have to wrap it up, but one last thing, the fish.
The fish, yeah. So I think that's a funny idea in that, like, you could definitely play with him visually as a fish. Like, you could find places to use that as a visual gag. I had 2 reservations about it. The first is there's a show called The Amazing World of Gumball about a cat and a fish on Cartoon Network right now. He is a cat and a goldfish, and I wonder if making my characters exactly that same pairing would make that a difficult sell, because they're like, oh, well, we already have a very successful cat and goldfish show. Yep. And the second one was I don't know how I feel about Pepper having murdered Monterey and eaten him, especially for a 6 to 11. Like, there were things like, oh, this is getting a little old, this is getting a little aged up, maybe, and then it's like that feels dark to me. Like that, in my head, he had 2 ghost parents and he had ghost grandparents, and it was just like a lineage of ghosts. Yeah.
He's from the ghost people, and he's
exactly.
a cat. Yeah.
But I do think that's a funny gag.
There's
that
something
you could
funny
play
in
out
it.
visually. And it's like, oh, maybe it's like they're trying to hide, and he goes against like one of those like mounting boards that you'd have a bass against that you had caught, or it's like he could hang out in a fish tank, or or maybe there's something like different ghosts have different animal shapes or something like that. But that would be definitely something I would want to talk out more, and just because the judges' feedback is sort of just pulled down only, like there's not really a back and forth. Yeah, that's where I stand with that.
Okay,
like
just curious.
Yeah.
Because it comes up a lot.
Christopher Updike really seems like he's brought that up. I think every
time
set of feedback we've had so far.
Pretty much.
I don't want to discount the idea. Like, I certainly like it, but yeah, it's like the fact that there's a show called Gumball with a cat and a goldfish.
That's a good point.
Seems
it's a very
like
good point.
That might be worrying, and it's
Gumball.
I would. Yeah, that's a big show. I didn't realize that character was a goldfish at first, because he has arms and legs.
Yeah.
But that's what it is. Like, his head is my character's just a head too, so whatever.
Okay, thank you for this little bit of time. Good luck. We've got a couple weeks to go, and I guess I will see you again soon, and I get to have one more dose of Pepper and Monterey before all this is over.
Yeah.
Break a leg.
Forward to it.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mike.
See ya.